Empires Unearthed presents the rise and fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a powerful, multinational empire that once dominated Central Europe for centuries. This documentary will uncover the origins, the politics, the diverse cultures, and the final disintegration of one of Europe's most complex imperial structures. From its birth in the Habsburg monarchy to its collapse after the First World War, the story of this empire is one of ambition, compromise, conflict, and ultimately fragmentation. Let us now explore how this empire rose to greatness and why it could not survive the modern age. The roots of the Austro-Hungarian Empire trace back to the rise of the Habsburg family in the late Middle Ages. Through strategic marriages, military conquests, and political alliances, the Habsburgs gradually expanded their control across Central Europe. In 1273, Rudolf of Habsburg was elected King of the Romans, beginning the long association of the dynasty with the Holy Roman Empire. By the 16th century, the Habsburgs had established their dominance over Austria, Bohemia, Hungary, and large parts of modern-day Germany and Italy. Emperor Charles V ruled over an empire so vast it was said the sun never set on it. After his abdication, the Habsburg realms were divided into Spanish and Austrian branches. The Austrian line took control of Central European lands and began to build what would later become the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They consolidated power in Vienna and faced continuous challenges from the Ottoman Empire, France, and internal rebellion. The Battle of Mohács in 1526 was a turning point when the Hungarian crown fell into Habsburg hands. By the 17th century, the Austrian Habsburgs had become one of the most powerful royal houses in Europe. They played a central role in the 30 Years' War and emerged with increased influence under the Peace of Westphalia. Over time, their holdings included not only Austria, but also Hungary, Bohemia, Croatia, Transylvania, parts of northern Italy, and even the Austrian Netherlands. However, this vast empire was a patchwork of languages, religions, and ethnic groups, which made governance difficult. Despite their diversity, the Habsburgs relied on Catholicism and dynastic loyalty to hold the empire together. But as the Enlightenment and nationalist ideas began to spread, the cracks in their imperial control would soon begin to widen. By the early 19th century, the Habsburg Empire was facing increasing internal pressures from the rising tide of nationalism and liberalism sweeping across Europe. The Napoleonic Wars had weakened traditional monarchies and inspired revolutionary ideas across the continent. Although the Habsburgs managed to survive the revolutions of 1848, they were forced to recognize the need for reform. Hungarian demands for greater autonomy became too powerful to ignore. In 1867, a historic compromise was reached between the Austrian crown and Hungarian leaders. This agreement created the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary. The empire was now divided into two distinct entities, Austria and Hungary, each with its own parliament and government, but united under a single emperor. Franz Joseph I was crowned both Emperor of Austria and King of Hungary, and he would rule until 1916. Vienna and Budapest became the twin capitals of this complex empire. This dual structure was an attempt to satisfy Hungarian national aspirations while maintaining imperial unity. However, it excluded many of the other ethnic groups in the empire, such as Czechs, Slovaks, Croats, Serbs, Romanians, and Ukrainians. Tensions among these groups would grow as they demanded equal status and political representation. Despite its internal divisions, the Austro-Hungarian Empire entered a period of relative stability and modernization. New railways, industries, and institutions were established, bringing economic growth. Cities like Prague, Lviv, Trieste, and Zagreb flourished as cultural and political centers. Yet beneath the surface, nationalist movements continued to gain strength. The empire was a delicate balance of compromise, diplomacy, and repression. Its leaders were constantly navigating between tradition and reform, loyalty and rebellion. The seeds of future conflict were being sown within its very structure. The dual monarchy was an extraordinary experiment in imperial management, but one that was ultimately unsustainable in the face of 20th century upheaval. In the final decades of the 19th century, the Austro-Hungarian Empire experienced a cultural and economic renaissance. Industrialization expanded rapidly in both Austria and Hungary, transforming cities and rural regions alike. Vienna emerged as a major center of art, music, science, and intellectual thought. It was the age of Freud, Mahler, Klimt, and the secessionist movement. Hungary, too, experienced a national revival, promoting the Hungarian language and cultural identity. The empire supported a vast and growing bureaucracy to manage its multi-ethnic population. Over 50 million people lived under the Habsburg crown, and they spoke more than a dozen languages. From the Polish and Ruthenians of Galicia to the Slovenes, Croats, and Serbs of the southern provinces, the empire was a mosaic of peoples and traditions. Franz Joseph I maintained a paternal and conservative rule, striving to keep peace among competing national interests. But the policy of dualism that gave Hungary equal status also alienated other ethnic groups who demanded similar recognition. The Czechs, particularly in Bohemia, pushed for their own autonomous status but were repeatedly denied. South Slavic peoples, including Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, began to look toward pan-Slavic ideals and greater unity with neighboring Serbia. This rise of nationalism posed a serious threat to the imperial structure. At the same time, tensions with neighboring powers were growing. The Balkans had become a hotspot of international rivalry. Russia saw itself as the protector of Slavic peoples, while the Ottoman Empire was losing its grip on the region. Austria-Hungary expanded its influence into the Balkans by occupying Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1878 and formally annexing the territory in 1908. This move angered Serbia and Russia, deepening divisions in the region. By the turn of the century, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was at a crossroads. Externally, it was seeking to assert itself as a great power in the European balance. Internally, it was cracking under the weight of unresolved national questions. It was a fragile imperial structure held together by diplomacy, censorship, military power, and the force of tradition. But it could not forever contain the powerful currents of change that were sweeping across Europe. The stage was set for the final crisis that would bring the empire to its knees. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was assassinated in Sarajevo. His killer was Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb nationalist connected to a radical group seeking South Slavic independence. The assassination stunned the empire and gave Austria-Hungary the excuse it had long sought to confront Serbia. Backed by Germany, Austria-Hungary delivered a harsh ultimatum to Serbia. When Serbia refused parts of it, Austria-Hungary declared war. Within weeks, Europe was engulfed in the First World War. Austria-Hungary found itself fighting on multiple fronts against Serbia, Russia, and later, Italy and Romania. The war exposed the deep flaws within the empire. Its military was outdated and poorly led, its logistics strained, and its people divided in loyalty. Many Slavic soldiers were reluctant to fight against other Slavs, and desertions were common. Ethnic tensions inside the empire grew worse as trust between the government and minority populations eroded. Economic hardship struck the civilian population as food shortages, inflation, and military requisitions took a devastating toll. Vienna and Budapest tried to maintain control, but revolutionary sentiments were growing. By 1917, as the war dragged on, discontent turned to open resistance. The Russian Revolution inspired radicals across the empire, and nationalist movements gathered strength. Czech, Slovak, South Slavic, and Romanian leaders began openly calling for independence and formed exile committees abroad. In response to mounting pressure, Emperor Karl I, who had succeeded Franz Joseph in 1916, tried to reform the empire. He proposed a federal restructuring to give more autonomy to various nationalities. But it was too late. By 1918, Austria-Hungary was crumbling from within. Military defeats on the Italian front and the loss of German support sealed its fate. On October 3rd, Austria-Hungary signed an armistice, ending its participation in the war. A week later, Emperor Karl renounced any role in government, effectively ending the Habsburg monarchy. The Austro-Hungarian Empire ceased to exist. The collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1918 marked the end of centuries of Habsburg rule. In its place emerged several new nations, including Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, later Yugoslavia. Other regions were absorbed by Romania, Poland, and Italy, dramatically redrawing the map of Central and Eastern Europe. The Treaty of Saint-Germain and the Treaty of Trianon formally dissolved the empire and imposed harsh terms on Austria and Hungary. Austria was reduced to a small landlocked republic, stripped of its imperial crown and forbidden from uniting with Germany. Hungary lost 2/3 of its territory and population, creating deep resentment that would persist for generations. The legacy of the Austro-Hungarian Empire is complex. It had been an empire of paradoxes, a monarchy that ruled over a patchwork of nationalities, cultures, and languages, a state that both suppressed and fostered development. It produced incredible cultural achievements. Vienna was home to artists, philosophers, and scientists who shaped modern Europe. Figures like Freud, Klimt, Mahler, and Wittgenstein lived and worked under the Habsburgs. Yet the empire also failed to create a sustainable political structure that could accommodate its diverse peoples. Its downfall unleashed long-buried national ambitions, but also set the stage for future conflicts. Many of the ethnic and territorial disputes that arose after its collapse contributed directly to the instability of the interwar period. The rise of fascism in Austria and Hungary, the tension in Yugoslavia, and the grievances that fueled World War II all had roots in the imperial past. Even today, the memory of the Austro-Hungarian Empire lingers in the architecture of Prague, Budapest, and Vienna, in the cultural connections that cross modern borders, and in the ongoing debates over nationalism, federalism, and identity in Central Europe. The story of the Austro-Hungarian Empire is not just a tale of rise and fall. It is a mirror reflecting the challenges of diversity, governance, and unity in a complex world.